Tonight, you may hear a truth that challenges everything you thought you knew about grooming dogs. And the silent struggle behind closed doors in grooming salons across the world, there's a decision that professionals face with heavy hearts when a dog comes in with severely matted fur. What looks like just tangled hair to the untrained eye is often a painful web pulling tightly against skin, restricting movement and trapping moisture and bacteria beneath its surface. This is where philosophy meets responsibility, because every stroke of a clipper carries weight beyond appearance. It carries ethics, empathy, and the question of what is truly humane. In moments like these, professionals often recall guidance shared by Dr. Becker, who emphasizes that animal welfare must always come before aesthetic expectation, and sometimes preserving a coat is not an act of kindness if that coat has become a source of pain. But the real tension begins when owners cannot see what groomers see beneath the surface. There are cases where matting hides wounds, infections, or even skin tearing. And in those moments, the groomer must decide whether continuing the request could cause harm or whether refusing it is the only ethical path forward. Silence often fills the room when such decisions are made, because what follows is not just a service refusal, but a confrontation with emotion, trust, and misunderstanding. And somewhere in that silence lies a deeper story unfolding, one that will reveal how compassion sometimes requires saying no before. We continue, the story becomes even more complex when time is considered, because severe matting does not happen overnight. It builds slowly over weeks or months, often unnoticed by busy owners who love their pets deeply, yet may not recognize the signs until intervention becomes urgent. And at that point, the groomer is placed in a position where every possible solution carries risk. The choice is no longer about beauty, but about survival, comfort, and dignity. And this is where the influence of Dr. Becker becomes especially important, because her teachings remind professionals that the emotional weight of grooming decisions cannot be separated from medical understanding and ethical awareness. The groomer must think like a caregiver, not just a stylist. And in some heartbreaking cases, the only way to relieve suffering is to remove the coat entirely, even when it feels extreme to the observer outside the salon door. And yet, that decision is never taken lightly. It is preceded by careful evaluation, gentle handling, and repeated attempts to minimize stress for the animal involved. Sometimes sedation or veterinary support is recommended, but even then there are limits to what can safely be done. And so the groomer stands at the intersection of compassion and constraint, knowing that whatever choice is made will be questioned by someone who cannot see the full reality beneath the fur. And in those moments, the lesson becomes clear that true care is not always gentle in appearance, but it is always intentional, always informed, and always understanding. Yet the story does not end when a groomer makes the difficult decision to refuse a dematting request, because what follows is often a storm of emotion, misunderstanding, and fear from pet owners who believe they are doing what is best, but the groomer sees a different reality, one shaped by training experience and the silent evidence of pain hidden beneath the coat. In many cases, the matting has already tightened to the skin, creating pulling sensations that intensify with every movement the dog makes. This is where the unseen conflict begins, a place where compassion must override convenience, and where safety becomes the only measure that matters. Professional groomers often recall teachings inspired by Dr. Becker, who emphasizes that animals cannot advocate for themselves, and therefore humans must become their voice when suffering is not visible at first glance. But what is less spoken about is the emotional toll this responsibility places on the groomer, who must balance compassion for the animal with empathy for the distressed owner standing on the other side of the table. Every hesitation, every plea, and every misunderstanding adds pressure to a moment that already carries the weight of potential harm if the wrong choice is made. And somewhere within that pressure, a deeper question emerges about whether compassion is always about doing what is requested, or whether it is about doing what is necessary to prevent suffering that cannot be undone. At this stage, many groomers describe a moment of pause where the environment seems to narrow down to the single responsibility of protecting the dog above all else. That pause often defines the outcome more than any technical skill, because it is in that silence that ethics becomes action. But the hardest part arrives after the decision is made, when explanations must be given and trust must be rebuilt, even if emotions are running high and understanding is delayed. In these moments, communication becomes as important as the grooming itself, because clarity can soften what initially feels like refusal. And yet, even with clarity, there is still grief on both sides because no one enters a grooming appointment expecting it to end with limitations instead of transformation. This is where the deeper lesson continues to unfold, reminding us that every coat, every knot, and every decision reflects a larger truth about care, responsibility, and the limits of human control. In the quiet aftermath of such choices, groomers often reflect on the guidance of Dr. Karen Becker, recognizing that true compassion sometimes means accepting discomfort in order to prevent greater harm. But what few people realize is that some of these decisions lead to consequences that no one anticipates weeks later. Unexpected reactions in behavior health or trust can surface, revealing that the impact of grooming choices extends far beyond the salon and into the emotional bond between human and animal in ways that are not always immediately visible, and reshapes understanding of care itself in profound and lasting way that always forward. We move deeper into the unseen consequences of grooming decisions, where every action taken in the salon echoes far beyond its walls. Because what begins as a simple dematting request often becomes a turning point in the relationship between human and animal. Trust, once broken or protected, can shape behavior in ways that are subtle yet permanent. And this is where reflection becomes essential for every professional who has stood in that difficult space between comfort and harm. Because understanding does not always come immediately, and wisdom is often built through the weight of experience, not theory alone. And in this space, the influence of Dr. Karen Becker continues to resonate, reminding caregivers that animals experience fear, pain, and relief in deeply authentic ways that demand respect rather than assumption. Yet the deeper truth is that ethical grooming is not only about physical safety, but also about emotional responsibility and long-term well-being, because every decision leaves a trace in memory that may influence future encounters in ways that cannot always be predicted. And so groomers learn to read more than just fur. They learn to read posture, breathing, tension, and silence itself as indicators of comfort or distress. And in doing so, they become interpreters of a language that has no words, only signals and reactions. And over time, this awareness transforms routine grooming into something far more profound, a practice rooted in empathy, restraint, and responsibility, where every decision carries moral weight and every refusal can be an act of protection rather than denial. And as the conversation returns to the heart of the matter, it becomes clear that refusing certain dematting requests is not about rejecting care, but about redefining what care truly means in practice and in principle. Because when pain is present, compassion must take precedence over appearance. And this understanding shapes the future of ethical grooming in profound ways. And finally, we arrive at a simple truth that carries enormous depth. Care is not measured by what is done, but by what is chosen wisely, and sometimes what is chosen not to be done. And through this lens, the message becomes unmistakably clear that protecting animals requires courage, clarity, and compassion, working together in balance across every decision made in their care. And what remains after all explanations and emotions settle is a quieter understanding that responsibility is not always visible, but it is always present, guiding hands, decisions and boundaries in ways that define the difference between harm and healing. And in that realization, the work of grooming becomes more than a profession. It becomes a form of stewardship, where every act is shaped by awareness and every choice reflects a commitment to prevent suffering before it begins. And if you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.